I'm so happy today to have Will Lathrop here. Thanks for coming, Will. I've been excited to talk to you for a while. I know we've had this scheduled for a little bit, but thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and Kristen's here to co-host.
Thanks
You,
for having me, Andy.
yeah, I always appreciate you here, and I think you can add a lot to this because you have a legal background, and I don't know as much as you do about
I
this
mean, I
stuff.
never worked at the Attorney General's office, but I'm excited to talk to you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Um, yeah, let's get started. I just wanted to know for the kind of the general public, can you explain what a state attorney general does for people that maybe don't know?
Yeah, the Attorney General does a lot, and some of it is sort of present in everyday life, and some of it's sort of behind the scenes. So, if to break it up into sections, the Attorney General is really Oregon's top cop. It oversees a lot of the criminal law behavior across the state. So it's the chief law enforcement officer. It also is the chief child protection officer. There's two divisions in the Attorney General's office that are focused on protecting children or giving children the resources they need to thrive and be successful into adulthood. And then you have the sort of the representation of the government section of the Attorney General when the government gets sued or the government's going to or the state of Oregon is going to be suing other entities. The
Yeah.
Attorney General is involved in that as well.
I feel like that's the one that make the most headlines, and that's what I've seen. But
Yeah. Hmm.
but yeah, I was just curious because yeah, all that other stuff I wasn't really aware of, but
Yeah.
or some of it. Yeah, and I was curious too. So you at first for some reason I thought you were like a Portlander, but you're nearby Portland.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's complicated. So I've lived in Portland. I lived on Barbara for a while, and then I lived in Salem for a long time. But now I live in Newburgh,
Okay.
which I don't think people in Portland think of Newburgh as being part of Portland, but
Yeah.
people in Newburgh think they're part of Portland.
Yeah, it's like it's close enough that yeah, I
Yeah.
see what you mean. All right, let's get right in here. I wanted to know what letter grade you would give the current Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum. Hope I'm saying her name
Yeah,
right.
Rosenblum.
Yeah, I'll preface it to say that I'm not running against her,
Yeah.
and so a lot of my campaign focus isn't on what she has done well or hasn't done well, and it's difficult to always set to see, but I would say probably a D.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think she's done a very good job.
What things would you do differently?
Um, Ellen's done a really bad job of emphasizing or handling the first two things I've talked about. Most people don't know the role of the Attorney General in criminal justice because it's just not something that she's built on or been responsive to or even been helpful. In fact, she's really torn down a lot of the connectivity between law enforcement institutions across the state that used to plug into and depend upon the Attorney General of the Department of Justice.
In what way?
So the Attorney General really should be running point on all organized crime. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft, connecting DAs across the state with chiefs of police, with sheriffs, and then plugging into the federal government, which would be DEA, FBI, Interpol, and so that you can create this sort of web of information sharing, collective strategy, and resource sharing to be able to take on these organized criminal entities. And that existed before her, and in her 10 years of office, it's really started to decay.
It does seem like that just from kind of my perspective, but like because I was mentioning like the kind of federal lawsuits, I guess, or the state lawsuits against the federal. Those are what I see most. Do you feel like she does that more than?
Yeah, I mean, when you're the attorney general, you can kind of, because there's a vast spectrum of responsibility, you can kind of choose and pick and choose the things that
You're
you
the
like.
state's lawyer, right?
In some instances,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what Ellen has done a really good job of is going after sort of multinational corporations and entities, which when you win those suits brings money into
Mm,
Oregon to the government, also brings money to consumers that are living in Oregon. And those are good things, but the Consumer Protection Division of the DOJ is 1/5 of one
right.
eighth of one division. So
Wow. Wow.
she's led with what is a tiny fraction of what the attorney general is supposed to do. And that's what most people over the last 10 years think the attorney general is. And they don't know about the child protection side of
Yeah.
the role. They don't know about the criminal justice side of the role or some of the other legal entities that are really important just because that's what she's led with. Yeah.
Yeah. It really does seem like that in my kind of day job world. I deal or like just follow what the CFPB does a lot, and it seems like that's kind of her state equivalent of the consumer finance
Yeah.
thing that she's focused on. But yeah, I didn't like. I don't think the average person would know all that other stuff is in her
Yeah.
responsibility. But it's
Those are
interesting.
those are important things. I'm not trying to play that down, but it's just a fraction
Yeah,
of the role.
yeah, and it does seem like a small piece of it. Um, I was curious too, like, how did you kind of start on this path, your legal path? And also, I was curious about your time as Marion and Yamhill County prosecutor. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I come from a really small town called Joseph, Oregon. We'll have a lake on the other side of
I
the
love
state.
Joseph. It's beautiful.
It
I mean, I
is.
don't know that I want to live there. It must have been, it's a very insular, removed place,
Very.
but I mean, it's very beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, home is always home. So
Yeah,
I would always love to live there, but it's a great place to grow up. But it's not a place that it's, producing large amount of lawyers and doctors. It's sort
right.
of a local school system that's built to make you equipped to work in ag or construction or things
Mm,
like that. And so I don't think being a lawyer was on my mind when I was in high school or a younger kid. But when I got into to school to the university, I played college athletics and I like competition and I sort of thrive in that environment. So I started getting involved or becoming interested in law school and one thing led to another, and I ended up going to Willamette University to go to law school.
okay.
Yeah,
Where?
not
Which one? I always give. Is that Salem? Where is that?
Salem.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. I was in Tacoma. I went to University of Puget Sound for undergrad.
Okay. And then which one were you in, Marion or Yamhill County first? Which one was it?
So I went to Yamhill County first and worked for Brad Berry, who's still the kind of outgoing district attorney there. And I worked there for a couple of years trying low-level cases. That's how you always start in prosecution. And then I was recruited away to Marion County to join their special victims unit,
Okay.
where I was primarily a child sex abuse prosecutor. I also handled homicide, adult sexual assault, domestic violence cases, human trafficking cases, and even some drug trafficking cases. My major focus, though, when I was in the state of Oregon, was protecting children from violence. The bulk, if you know these kind of cases, and I hope you don't, but the bulk of the cases was handling were either Jessica's Law cases, or ballot measure 11, serious
Wow.
felonies against
Wow.
children. That was the majority of my caseload.
And that's the worst of the worst.
That's
Yeah.
the worst of the worst that nobody wants to hear about, and shouldn't
Yeah.
have to hear about.
Yeah. It's one of the things. Yeah, I don't think people even think about a lot because it's not something people want to think about.
Yeah,
But yeah, it is a very important role, I'd imagine. And yeah, and I'm curious about your human trafficking stuff more, but I do want to talk about this 110 stuff because it's more topical, and I'll get back to the
yeah,
other
sure.
stuff. So yeah, like there's a lot of conversation this week about, at least in Multnomah County, how this stuff is going bad. Like,
Yeah,
and I heard it most from Eli. We shout out Eli Arnold a lot, who's a city council candidate, but he's a police officer downtown here,
yeah,
and he was just saying it's basically, from my understanding, you have the option to uh, go to drop off or be arrested. Is that right? From your
Yeah. In
yeah.
Multnomah County, he said that I mean, this is what they've apparently come up with. He says theoretically, I could arrest somebody for doing drugs, and I can say, do you want, now they're calling it deflection instead of diversion. I don't,
yeah,
there's these ridiculous terms are always changing, but an alternative to incarceration.
yeah,
And he said, I can tell them, do you want to go to a drop-off center? You want to go to jail?
yeah.
And they can say drop-off center. And he said, I can drop them off and they don't have to go in.
Right.
And they don't need proof that they've
No.
been through the door.
Mhm.
And then he said, I can arrest them 5,000 times and drop them off at that drop-off center and they can avoid jail every time.
Yeah.
So in my head, it's like, what's changed? It doesn't seem like anything. But
And I
In
think,
Multnomah County. I
yeah,
mean, I
in
don't
Multnomah
think,
County,
I
yeah.
don't know that Clackamas or Washington are going to be
Right.
interested in that, but
so let's unpack this together. So
Yeah.
if I say
Yeah.
something unclear or feel free to interrupt me. So because it's complicated and I want to try to make it
Mhm.
simple. When ballot measure 110 was first passed, it was couched as a treatment bill, right? That would
Yes.
give treatment instead of people in incarceration. Well, that in itself was a bill of goods in the first place because we were already working in treatment and very few people were actually being incarcerated. That was
Right.
built on a lie. But when people pushed back on there was no accountability mechanism in the new law in ballot measure 110, the authors would say, no, they can get a ticket of $100. Like they still get, it's a fine. They just don't go to prison. Well, the authors knew, and everybody in criminal justice knew that the practical reality was those people probably don't have money or
Yeah.
weren't going to pay in the first place. So, you probably read the stories where officers or across the state were started writing tickets for about a month, and then they thought this is pointless. This isn't going anywhere.
Right.
We're not going to waste our time, and so there was zero accountability. And so it's been interesting to watch as you see this groundswell of popular support, bipartisan popular support for some return to accountability that I'm sure that you and your listeners are mostly aware of. That pressure put pressure on the legislature to
Mm-hmm.
actually do something. And they came up with, after a series of compromises, that's what I call them, a series of
Mm-hmm.
compromises and political negotiation, they came up with this sort of like patchwork quilt behemoth of a statute that's House Bill 4002. You'll know exactly what I'm saying when I say any law that is complicated is hard to execute.
Mm.
Any law that's ambiguous will absolutely be litigated. And that's what 4002 is. It's complicated and it's ambiguous. And so it's not going to bring the sort of immediate change that people wanted in the first place, largely because the solution was political and not practical.
Mm.
We are in a time period, and I started my prosecution career during the meth
Mm.
wave of the early
But, well,
2000s.
wasn't it necessarily going to be political? Because it's in, I mean, when Kevin Sabet, who's a former drug policy advisor for 3 White Houses, came on my podcast, he and I have been working on and thinking about this recriminalization of drugs issue. And he said, and he was right. I mean, he was worried about the chances in the legislature of a recriminalization
Yeah.
bill that generally,
Yeah.
and I was thinking chances of something like that passing are maybe 40%. And then, of course, the polls start coming out,
Yeah.
right? There's the DHM poll, the Emerson poll, the Police Union Commission poll. I guess that's the DHM poll that said people want recriminalization
Yeah.
of drugs. 1990s style language.
Growing by the day. The polls were
Yes,
getting stronger by the day.
Mm.
that's exactly right. I think the legislature paid attention to that, but also the people, this, the people we're dealing with in the legislature are, I don't think they were thrilled about the idea, the majority,
Yeah.
the Democratic majority. I don't think, and I think my opinion is just that the Democratic majority in the legislature takes a while for them to catch up with
Yeah. They're
the
shooting behind the target.
populace. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Part of it is where they're situated and kind of how they live their lives, and in my opinion. And I think those polls were helpful. And the people who came and testified were really helpful.
Yeah.
But wasn't there necessarily going to be a compromise unless, and as Kevin and I were talking about, it was going to have to be a ballot measure otherwise. I mean, if you wanted something clearer, as you said,
Yeah.
something where there was, let's say what Josh Markey, former DA of
Yeah.
Clatsop County,
Yeah.
wanted, which was a felony,
Mhm.
something with a fair amount of teeth to it, that would have to be a ballot measure, would it not?
Absolutely. You're right.
And then we're facing tons of money
Yeah.
that's going to have to be spent on that because we know the Drug Policy Alliance is going to oppose us.
Now you're hitting the nail on the head.
And we know they spent millions to get that 110 passed.
We don't need to overcomplicate it and complicate this. The people overwhelmingly wanted it. Law enforcement overwhelmingly wanted it.
Yeah.
The treatment community wanted it. The mayors and the county commissioners wanted it, but the major drug lobby, sort of the de-incarceration, decriminalization lobby, the national lobby, didn't want it, and they give a lot of money to the Democrat leadership. So it was about money versus
Yeah.
practical response, and it created this sort of bastardized compromise that I'm worried is going to return back to what we're just talking about with the paper tickets, that
Yeah.
you do it, and as soon as a police officer realizes, like, I pick this guy up, I put or this person up, I put them at the drop-off center, they don't go in. Why did I waste my gas? Why did I waste my time? And it's back to the same thing as the ticket, because
Right.
no one county's talking about essentially a bottomless deflection program with no teeth, which why I say it's sort of
But no actual deflection.
no actual deflection. And what's so frustrating about this is I want what you want, which is what all reasonable people want, is I want to see people, I want the criminal justice system to be used in a compassionate way to see people who are struggling with what is now the most dangerous and addictive drug in human history,
Yeah.
to actually have success,
Fentanyl,
get them out of a situation where they're almost certainly about to die,
Mhm.
and get them in a place where they're thriving and productive members of our community. And we're still playing politics of, like, how can we word this so it won't actually give the police any opportunity to intervene? And for some reason, there's a section of the radical left that is clinging to this idea that it would be death and destruction
Mhm.
and all the things you see in Portland that are so frustrating is better than just having somebody have to go through treatment and get clean. And
Mhm.
I don't understand it. I don't understand that radical philosophy. But 4002 is failing largely because there was it was forced compromise with people who had no intention of actually bringing accountability to the table.
But they did, to be fair. I mean, I was surprised with what they did do. I
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
And I was surprised. And your opponent, Dan Rayfield, I think was helpful in that regard in a way that also surprised me. And
Mhm.
maybe I just don't know him well enough. I mean, I definitely don't. I don't know him at all, but I was surprised that it is a misdemeanor. And I know it doesn't go as far as, say, Josh Markey wanted, or maybe you wanted, it sounds like. But
Well,
what would you do? I mean, and what
yeah.
can you do? Like, let's say you are Attorney General. What, if anything, can you do? Because it seems to me that Multnomah County, as long as Jessica Vega Peterson is the chair, in my opinion, they're going to do whatever they can. She, Willie, unless, yeah, I mean, she kind of has some sort of plenary authority. Will do whatever she can to skirt what's going on there,
y-
in my opinion.
yeah, what you're asking what I would do
Yeah, what can
differently.
you
Like
do if you're
I,
Attorney
I'm
General?
less concerned about felony or misdemeanor. You just need some function of accountability that somebody has to make a decision whether or not they're going to meaningfully go through treatment or they're going to spend time in jail. Like there has to be some sort of carrot and stick.
Right.
We know that that's true. Statistics back that. And the major flaw of 4002, one is it's complex. So what would I do? I would make it really simple. Unclassified misdemeanor, just say what it actually is. And the second thing is it's not equitable. You go to one county, they don't have to do a deflection program. If you went to certain counties, there is no deflection program. They can't afford it. You go to Washington
Right.
County, it's well set up. You go to Multnomah County, they're actually trying to set up in a way that nobody would ever be held accountable. And so what county you're living on, what other crime, domestic violence, sex abuse, would you go to one county and get one treatment, one sort of sentence, go to another county, get another one?
Multnomah County.
But
Andy and I both talked to
Yeah.
the head of the corrections union, Nicole Busher. We don't have any, I don't know if you know this, well, nobody's in jail here
yeah,
except Measure 11 offenders.
yeah,
That, according to Nicole, that's who is
yeah.
in jail here in Multnomah County. And everybody else is running around virtually unfettered.
Yeah, but that's that's another serious issue. That is because of execution of the law. But this law is written to allow counties to sort of like customize the law
Yeah.
Hmm.
to their liking, and it creates these a patchwork quilt of different counties who are handling uh, the same crime in different ways. And to me, that's not justice and that's not equity. I could live. So I live in Newburgh, is in Yamhill County, a
Hmm.
couple miles away, Sherwood, which is Washington County. If you were caught with a possession of methamphetamine or fentanyl in a 2 mile difference, you would have two completely different experiences in the criminal justice system, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not
Kevin
justice.
Barton's your DA in Washington County. It's going to be
So
real different.
you're gonna get something in Yamhill County. Yamhill County might decide not to have deflection programs at all, and I think anything that is inequitable like that is just a bad law from the start.
As Attorney General, though, is there anything you can, I don't see what you could do about that. Can you?
No, no, you're exactly right. The Attorney General is handling organized crime at the higher level. If I was the Attorney General, first of all, the Attorney General titles, I don't know if you know this, they title all of the ballot measures. And ballot measure
Right.
110 should have been titled appropriately in the first place. And then it may never have passed. If people knew they were legalizing drugs,
Yeah.
it would
I
have been
actually didn't know that they
it would be a stitch
named
in
the bills.
time because
Yeah.
we know statistically people don't actually read the ballot measures. They just
No.
read the
No.
title.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that case, one of the reasons I gave Ellen a D is because I believe that she introduced legislation in 2017 to drop possession of hard drugs from a felony to a misdemeanor,
Wow.
and then she titled ballot measure 110 in such a way that it would have a chance of passing because people would be duped into believing it was a treatment bill.
So the current Attorney General, you're saying titled ballot measure is who is responsible for titling ballot measure
Yes,
110.
ma'am.
So as the Attorney General, can you title any statewide ballot measure that you want?
Every ballot measure is titled by the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
really good to know,
Yeah, and so that you say, what would
because
Attorney
those
General?
are
I would go back
scary.
in time, and so I've been a lawyer for a while now, and I've worked under or been in Oregon under three different AGs, and this is the first Attorney General that's really politicized the position, and these ballot measures shouldn't be the Attorney General shouldn't have any political input into the
Right.
titling. It should just be plain and informative so that the
Yeah.
voters know what they're voting for. Regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, it should just be plain. You should get to the same place every
So
time.
you're not selling it.
You're not selling it.
Yeah.
It's not an advertising exactly. So you asked me what I would do. I'd go back, if I could go back in time, I would do that. But going forward, I think there's a role of the Attorney General as being an ambassador for law enforcement and for best practices across the state. And I would probably be more vocal in representing the needs of law enforcement in almost every measure, and
Yeah.
this one included. And you notice that the Attorney General was suspiciously missing from all of these discussions around
Right,
House
right.
Bill 4002.
Yeah, and kind of like you mentioned earlier, this kind of just like connecting all of law enforcement throughout the state and stuff. It does seem like that's kind of absent right
Yes.
now, but maybe that's just my perspective. I was curious too because you mentioned we were talking about fentanyl, and you mentioned you started in the kind of meth era.
Yeah.
I just feel like that's important for people. I talk about it all the time on the show. People who don't really understand like the gravity of fentanyl.
Hmm.
But I'm just curious from your perspective, like that shift from meth to fentanyl and like how that changed stuff.
Well, one thing I'd say from meth at the time, it was so addictive and so easy to get and so much cheaper than cocaine and heroin and the drugs of its predecessor drugs, let's call it, that it felt daunting and it felt impossible.
Hmm.
But there was a lot of legislation and teeth put to rules around methamphetamine. We actually drove manufacturing methamphetamine out of the state. It's almost not
Hmm.
manufactured in Oregon anymore at
Hmm.
all. And we were able to greatly curb the tide as it came
How?
in.
What do
I,
we
I
do?
think it was one of the proud moments of collaboration, and that was largely led by the Attorney General's office. Collaboration across law enforcement to do what I talked about earlier: build a collective strategy, sharing information, and pushing resources where they're needed most, so that these
Hmm.
cartels, like drug dealing cartels, are highly organized and they're highly financed. So we also have to be organized and financed, or we're going to be consistently be losing that fight, and that's where we're at right now. But when I talk to law enforcement, they'll admit that meth is a hill compared to the mountain of fentanyl.
Yeah.
Fentanyl dwarfs
Yeah.
meth. And I talked
It's
to
synthetic,
some.
right? So,
It's
I mean, China can just pump it in
it's
or
cheap
whomever.
and it's so dang addictive. It is,
Yeah.
and so I was talking to some treatment providers, and look, I'm a Republican running in the city of Portland, which is largely Democrat. So I always have skeptics. Every time I make a call, people want to not like me immediately because
Right.
they've sort of been like indoctrinated from the beginning that
Yeah.
Republicans are going
I talk
to
about it on the show with the R word. People don't. Yeah.
ruin your lives and chase your children around or whatever it is. But once I was able to sort of pierce through with these treatment providers to let them know I have a lot of experience. I've worked in treatment courts, mental health courts, drug courts. I understand these issues really well. Let's sit down and have a real conversation about this. All of them, not even unwillingly admitted, all of them admitted that we don't even know, we don't have cases of people getting clean from fentanyl. It's this sort of new wave drug, and it takes
You mean
it's
like studies? Or, I mean,
yes,
I
there,
know people who have, but yeah, I don't know of any
but no,
studies.
but nobody knows how long that will last. We
Right.
don't know
Yeah.
relapse.
Yeah.
That's right.
We don't know how it's changed the brain
We're still
chemistry.
learning it all.
It's scary.
Because this
Yes.
is, I mean, we're talking like a 5, 10-year-old, or at least for the West Coast. It's very young,
Right.
It's been in the medical industry for a long time, but to
Right,
be
right.
For
free and
surgical
free and
pain
yeah,
and
and
yeah.
pills on the
Most of us have
street.
had a
For
surgery. Most
Yeah.
of us have been on it. Yeah.
recreational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been mostly patches, right? They,
Right,
they
right.
give the
Hmm.
slow dispense patch, so that you can just go anywhere and get a quick a pill is new. And anybody who's seen people nodding off on the street,
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
out of their mind, knows the immediate effect of that. But the point is it's going to be when we talk about treatment in House Bill 4002. I don't know what fantasy land people are living in that they think you just kind of walk into a treatment facility, you have a
Right.
couple of nice days in there, and your life turns around. Like
Right.
there isn't a lot of data that supports that our current treatment is even oriented to deal with this monster of fentanyl. I think we're fighting a war with a BB gun right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just the policy. I think it's the awareness we're really suffering from, and people are dying.
Yeah.
This
Yes.
should be
That's
an
exactly
emergency.
right.
People are
Yeah.
dying, and I talk to so many people who've lost someone,
Yeah.
Mhm.
who've been negatively affected somehow, or are really struggling and praying for some family member to get out of this darkness. And so we should be taking it seriously. And half measures and compromised bills, and I've heard people say it's not perfect, but it's 85%. Like we need bills that are brilliant to deal with a exceedingly difficult problem, and
Yeah,
that's
but
not what
that
this
probably
is.
wouldn't have passed the legislature.
With real leadership, it
in
would
my
have.
opinion. Yeah, but that, I mean, I'm a pragmatist, so I don't know. I deal with kind of reality on reality's terms.
Sure.
You were talking about organized crime. It seems to me that as Attorney General, if what you're saying is correct about organized crime, and I just don't know enough about the Attorney General's office, but if that's true, can't you do something at some top level in regard to the synthetics that are being pumped in here,
We
that
have to.
all of this fentanyl being pumped into this state?
Day one, that's what I'll start doing I'll introduce myself and we'll get to work.
What do you do exactly with that? Where do you start?
Yeah, you start. These are not I guess the sexy things people want to hear, but you have to rebuild those relationships between law
Mm.
enforcement. Law enforcement's really been tore down over the last, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, but even over the last 10 years. There's been a strained relationship between statewide officials and law enforcement across the state, and there's total lack of trust. Most of the sheriffs and a lot of the DAs in the state have already endorsed me, largely because they know that I bring the sort of experience and the things that they're going to need to rebuild this connectivity across the state so we can start working together. Everybody's working in their own vacuum, their own silo. You have Nathan Vasquez, great guy, just elected. Portland itself has silos within the city of law enforcement because his predecessor wasn't really working well with the police, wasn't really working well with the sheriff's office. And that's just in Portland. Now imagine magnify that across 36 counties in the state. When in that broken, divided landscape, it's so easy for something organized to survive and thrive. We have to build that connectivity back together, get everybody on the same page, and become organized so that we're working together to make it hard to deal drugs here. And we actually have to invite in the federal government as well. DEA.
Yeah,
So we have
that's
the
exactly
Attorney General
right.
has jurisdiction up to the borders of Oregon and nowhere else. So we need to be working with multi
Yes.
jurisdictions, other AGs. Instead of working with other AGs to sue Fox News or
Right.
try to get rid of gas stoves, I would like to be working with other AGs to coordinate law enforcement
Thank you.
activities so we're tracking drug dealers as they're coming to our state. Nobody should be making millions of dollars off of crushing families and communities by selling drugs. When I go and see somebody on the street, I've seen this. I've got an 8-year-old son,
Mm.
a naked man on all fours, foaming out his mouth. It just eyes rolled back on the sidewalk. My son says, "Dad, remember, we're just moving back from Africa." He's like, "Dad, what's that? What's going on there?"
You in Portland? You must have been in
It's
Portland.
important.
Yeah.
And what am I? So I'm fumbling over my words. I
Andy
don't
and I
know. I
see
don't
this
know.
all the time.
And
Yeah.
you see it all the time. It's like, but somebody gave that guy, somebody took money from that person and is watching
Or
and
something. Yeah.
and waiting
Mhm.
for him to become sober enough to give it more money and another pill. That has to stop. We should all agree that that sort of behavior, that capitalism over this terrible disorder, has got to stop.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be really focused on that. And I will work with anybody and everybody that will help me make it hard to deal
Yeah.
drugs in the state of
I
Oregon.
was just gonna say it's Adrian got I recorded an episode on her show last week, and she is right downtown, and there was literally probably 30 people around her office doing fentanyl.
Constantly.
But this is right by the library. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
downtown here, but
Absolutely
it's a
constantly.
huge area of fentanyl use down there, and it's just amazing. I thought like, hey, it's a nice weekend, maybe things will be
If
cleaned
anything,
up
it's
out here,
worse.
but no, it's
And,
pretty
and
bad.
they're all selling. I mean, Bike Squad is there constantly.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
team, neighborhood response team that Eli Arnold is with, who's running for city council, they're there almost daily. And it doesn't matter. They can't make a dent in these people.
Yeah. Because
And
it
we
like
don't have enough police anyway. But even if we did,
because like you said, it's synthetic, and you can generate a lot of it.
And the industry is set up so the cartel, you know this, but it's set up where the low level dealers are really just shields. You're talking about
right,
young
that's exactly
kids,
right.
Mm.
people living in poverty, people in marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And so when they get arrested, they're completely expendable and
Right.
Yes.
replaceable to the entity. You have to drive those cases up to the head of the snake.
That's
You cut
right.
the head of the snake off, and you can't necessarily do that on a street in Portland. It has to be driven back, and that
But
it
as
requires a
AG,
statewide
you
response.
can't really do it. You've got to work with national and international, do you not?
Absolutely.
Like
I
Homeland
can,
Security
yes,
and
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and this is largely what I was doing in my last job. Is a very similar thing in just a different place. Hmm.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. But I did want to shout. I mean, this is kind of an aside. I just wanted to mention that because we were talking about Nathan Vasquez. I heard this week, and you probably saw it too, that he's being left out of the current county
Oh, of
discussion
course he
around all
is.
this stuff, even though he's incoming. He's
They don't want to enforce the law
but it's
in the
just
county.
more dysfunction in Multnomah County
Yeah.
around that stuff. But But yeah, tell me. Let's get into your. I'm really curious about your human trafficking stuff. Is that what you just were referencing when you were talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
hmm
Like, how'd you get started doing that? And like, I'm just curious about what you were doing with that and stuff.
A fraction of my, not a large fraction, but a fraction of my caseload in Salem was dealing with human trafficking cases, which was mostly sex trafficking cases. And this is, more than a decade ago. And then I was recruited away to go to the National District Attorneys Association as a child abuse attorney, and they're in the DC area. And then I ran into this organization called IJM, which is the world's largest anti-human trafficking NGO. So it's an INGO. And first, they asked me to lead multinational teams in Uganda,
What is the full name of the organization?
International Justice Mission.
Is it a religious organization or a
It's a faith-based
justice?
organization,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't do religious work. So it'd be similar to like the Red Cross or Salvation Army or those sort of things. Like
Okay.
so, in the human trafficking space, its model is really simple. Like they recruit prosecutors around the world, investigators around the world, social workers around the world. They plug into developing governments' existing institutions and kind of like defibrillate them, get them going so that and help build up their capacity so they can start dealing with crimes against the poor. So I was leading this multinational team first in Uganda. Northern Uganda had this 21-year civil war.
Mm.
After the war, they had all these militants coming back to these widows and orphans, and they pushed these widows and orphans off their land using all kinds of violence. So my team and I would go and find these women in the bush and the women and children in the bush, and we get them legal title to their land, and then we'd prosecute the violent land raiders in court.
And is this what kind of is that Uganda's court that you're doing that in?
Yeah,
Or? Okay,
yeah.
okay,
So we work in conjunction with the police and the prosecutors. It's
gotcha.
kind of like a player coach model where you're they have jurisdictional authority. And by the way, the teams I was leading, it was probably that team was probably like 85% Ugandan. So it was Ugandan lawyers, Ugandan investigators. There were some international people such as myself, but it was majority were Ugandans.
Yeah, I was just curious because I don't really know how that stuff works. If they're like international court or how, if they have jurisdiction over any of that, or I
It's
don't know.
it's really like a justice system reform program. So you're running cases through the court systems with the prosecutors and the police, so you can see what's broken. Then we'd circle back up to the Supreme Court and the head of all prosecution in Uganda, who's now a friend of mine. I was just reaching out to him last week, but then you use that data to inform new systems to renovate their court system. So one of the things we did when I was in Uganda is we implemented plea bargaining. They didn't have plea bargaining, so
Oh
every
wow,
single
wow,
case went to trial. Child-friendly courts, victim-friendly courts, trauma-informed care of victims, trauma-informed courtrooms, things that are more sophisticated. Because there's a huge problem of poor in a lot of sub-Saharan Africa don't access the criminal justice system. It's not really set up for them, and
mm,
so
mm.
they're sort of outside of the reach of justice. So we would do these on the ground cases, but we'd also use the data from that to affect the whole system. So I did that for a couple years. Then I was transferred to West Africa, where I worked in conjunction with the U.S. State Department, the Trafficking in Persons Division, and
Wow,
INL, which
wow,
is the Narcotics and Labor Division of the U.S. State Department, UNICEF, which is under the UN umbrella, and the Ghanaian government, and we were essentially rescuing child trafficking victims, really just child slaves is what they were,
wow,
and then we're
wow.
prosecuting masters and traders. We'd also go. The U.S. State Department also gave my team some money to go into the Middle East and rescue women who had been trafficked for labor or for sex in places like Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Oman, Qatar, probably a few other countries, but we were never able to get any traction on prosecution or into their court system. It was really just a seek and find, get this woman and get her out as quick as you
Mm.
possibly could.
So they couldn't keep her there and whatever. Yeah,
Some countries they would try. They would
right,
actually
right.
be on the side of the traffickers, because these
Wow.
were foreign women, and they were, I mean, just
These are
frankly, they were black, and so they just
okay.
were
Yeah.
they were just
Hmm.
Well,
not
now to say
treated
these
well.
are all countries that obviously women's rights aren't
Not
the top of the list, so to
at
speak.
all,
Yeah,
or at all, and yeah, a lot of dynamics that made them extremely vulnerable in those
yeah.
populations. So we did that for a few years. And the same thing is you would take these cases. Our team would work closely with the social workers, the prosecutors, and the police, and bring these cases through the court system. And then we'd work with the director of public prosecution, the IGP is what's called. They're the Inspector General of Police, which is overall police, and other presidential cabinets to sort of improve, renovate, transform the criminal justice system to be more accessible so that anybody who sees a child trafficking case could access the court system. Because the way it was when I started there, it's just not top of the mind for about 80% of the people to see a crime and actually engage with the criminal justice system. It's really for the wealthy and not
Right.
for everybody.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I was thinking, I think did you see there was something here locally about a trafficking sting, I think with PVV or something.
Mm.
I think they do a lot of those.
But I was just, yeah, gonna kind of tie that back because like I don't think a lot of people know how big of a problem that is in the
Big getting
world.
bigger. Yeah.
Oh, all we have to do is walk around here and
Yeah,
watch these women in and out of
right,
tents.
yeah.
It's
And so yeah, I was just curious, like
Yeah.
it's got to be a huge problem for Oregon too, right? I mean,
it
And
was a
kids and
it was a problem in Oregon before I left.
mhm.
I've been kind of like, I guess, shocked at how bad it's gotten. So I'm overseas working on human trafficking cases, largely because I think, Oregon has the infrastructure. It doesn't need a guy like me. I can be more impactful in a place that's still trying to develop these systems. And to come back and see the backslide in our criminal justice system over the last 10 years has been really, really hard to watch. When I was recruited away to DC, over a decade ago at the time, Oregon was thought to be on the forefront of victim protection. So if you were good at prosecution or in law enforcement in Oregon, they were headhunting guys like me because we would train other states in best practices. We have treatment courts, we have victims' rights, constitutional victims' rights, victims' compensation. We have really robust defendants' rules and rights in Oregon compared to other states. And to come back and see us kind of tearing those institutions down. And the net result is that when you have a lot of addiction, you have vulnerability, and when you have vulnerability, you have exploitation
Right.
every time.
exactly right.
As you've seen, addiction's gone up, and the kind of addiction. Imagine a woman who is just taken fentanyl. Like, what does her next 12 hours of vulnerability look
Right.
like? And
Yeah.
and we are seeing human trafficking at a scale
Oh,
that I would
we
not have
can
thought
see it.
imaginable.
We can see
It's
it.
on the street. It's so obvious it's on the street.
Mhm.
And then there's narco trafficking in the South, in Josephine and Jackson County, which is a whole nother animal.
Okay, that's where I grew up, Josephine County.
Okay.
Shout out to them. Yeah.
Yeah, Josephine County. Yeah. So they have, as you know, it's a huge county with not that big of a
Right.
population, and it's actually kind of an under-resourced population, and so they have a lack of law enforcement
They've
in general.
struggled with law enforcement. Yeah.
And you have these massive marijuana grows that are out in
Right.
the far out in the forest, and they're really trucking in unpaid migrant workers,
Yeah.
treating them
And a lot
terribly.
of that's international too,
It's
isn't it?
international.
Like it's
I'm glad you're
Chinese
bringing it up.
cartels.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up
Not
because
just Mexican.
it's
It's
a
not
lot
just
of
Mexican cartels like I think everybody thinks.
Chinese
Chinese
cartels,
Yeah.
Honduran.
Yeah.
people are surprised whenever I bring that up because they're like, "Well, weed was legalized here. What are you talking about?" But I'm like, "It's still, there's still this cartel activity going on."
Oh,
Do
it's
you
blown
already
up.
know how that works, or are you interested in how that works?
I mean, yeah, yeah.
So we legalized marijuana in Oregon. I think there's a handful of other states, mostly on the West Coast, and you have California and New York, something like that. There's probably more. But the reality is that most of the states in the United States don't have legalized marijuana. So there aren't enough consumers to
Mhm.
imbibe or smoke or eat
Right.
or
We're producing
yeah.
so much. What,
So
3 times the amount that we
Yeah.
use, and we use a lot.
And so the market here is that to sell legal marijuana, there's not a ton of money in that, but there's still lots of money to sell illegal marijuana to the states that haven't already legalized it. And so there's these front of the shop, it's kind of like money laundering, this front of the shop legal marijuana grows that back of the shop are really making their money shipping marijuana
Large
everywhere
quantities,
else.
yeah.
And it's still controlled, as it's always been, it's still controlled by essentially criminal organizations.
Right, yeah. And I've heard a lot about that from Southern Oregon. Yeah, there's a lot of migrants and people just, working on those grows.
It's awful. I mean,
Yeah.
they're put in tiny
And
rooms. They're treated
yeah, and I
terribly,
was
and
gonna
their
say,
families are threatened. If they say anything,
Yes.
they'll kill their families. It
yeah, I
is really
want to
bad.
say there's been, like people hurt and people killed and
Yeah.
stuff. And, yeah.
That's exactly right.
All right, yeah, I know we're getting close to the end here. Let me see. I did want to give you a quick chance to kind of compare yourself to your competitor. Like I said earlier, I don't know much about it. You probably know more than I do about Dan, but
I don't. I mean, I'm curious too, but how do you think that you're different from who I think is your I think obviously the race is going to come down to you and Dan Rayfield. So how do you distinguish yourself from him, and why should people vote for you?
I mean, we're night and day different. We'll start with the hair. He has some. I have none. But the reality is that Dan has been intimately involved in the legislature for the last 10 years.
Speaker.
And before that, he was the whip. And so he's highly political and politically connected. And my entire career has been public service. And
I guess he'd argue that's public service.
yeah, probably so. But actually, front lines, law enforcement, public service. And whenever you're a politician full-time, it's hard to be a lawyer full-time too. So Dan's really a part-time lawyer and a full-time politician. So
Are you working as a lawyer in any capacity now? Or
when I started this race, it's just full-time. I just have to do this all day, every day to be
full-time
successful. Yeah,
campaigning?
yeah. So as soon as I stepped down as the executive director at IJM, then I started running full-time. So on the one hand, I have really unique state, national, and international law enforcement background. Dan has zero law enforcement background. His background as an attorney has really been in civil litigation, like tort
Mhm.
cases. I have really been sort of a politically neutral, I'd say, and that's if you listen to my platform really is a nonpartisan problem
It
solving
definitely seems
platform.
that way. Yeah.
That's because that's my background, and Dan is very much a member of the Democrat
Establishment or
leadership
something. Yeah. Yeah.
establishment. And so if there's a big difference is that a selling point for me is you're not going to get politics from me. You're going to get problem solving. That's my nature. That's all I've ever done. Research me, do as much as you can and try to find a place where I've really been political about anything. I want to do what's best for the people of Oregon because I'm a 6th-generation Oregonian and I really love this place and I care about it. Portland not excluded. And on Dan's side, he's really in my position, I can do what's right. You can just look at House Bill 4002. In my position, I can do what's right because I'm not owned by anybody. But when you're in that sort of political machine and that's who you're attached to, you have to make compromises.
Yeah, it's his job.
And this is not the time in the state of Oregon with the level of crime, how terrible we are at protecting our children from just about everything, our addiction, the outmigration in the state. This is not a time for compromise. This is a time for courageous leaders who are doing the right thing and not the political thing. And that's going to be the big difference between us. And secondly, you cannot hire somebody. Everything in Oregon is not everything. We're in a low spot. Everybody knows that Oregon is
Oh,
not
I
at our best, right?
absolutely agree.
So you can't have voted on all of the things that have made this place terrible and
Yeah.
then say you're going to come and change
That's
them.
more of what I was
If
thinking
he
about.
knew
Yeah.
how, he would have done it by now. Like I don't
Right.
want to sound like a rhyming guy, but like if he actually knew how to fix it, why hasn't it been done? He's had that power. And secondly, in this position, like all the things I'm talking about, taking on an international drug cartel, Dan has zero experience doing that. In fact, there's very few people that have done that at an international level. I was just doing that in human trafficking, cross-border trafficking in West Africa. It's just a different commodity. They're using children and not drugs, but it's the same idea of bringing governments together, different government institutions, governments, the UN, the U.S. State Department, and working collectively to share resources and get everybody on the same page to drive down the prevalence of a crime. And we were able to drive down the prevalence of child trafficking by 36% in 5 years just by holding traffickers accountable. And the same is possible here. It's a business. If you make it an unpleasant place to do business, it will sharply drop and it won't take that long. Dan does not know how to do that. He would have to come and ask me. So you might as well just hire me.
Yeah. I was gonna say he is welcome on the show, but I just from hearing what I just heard it and just knowing people in the legislature, it does seem like he's kind of using this as a stepping stone from politics instead of like experience.
Sure.
But like I said, he's welcome to come on here and we'll talk to him if he wants to. Yeah. Is there anything you want to mention else about your Northwest story before I get into these goofy questions?
Yeah, I mean, can I just go through my platform real fast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would
Yeah,
that be
yeah,
helpful?
yeah, yeah.
And that could also talk about Northwest Story. So my platform is pretty simple. Like I just talked about, the first things first is going to be taking on organized crime, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and organized retail theft. You would be surprised at how much of the dysfunction around us is really caused by the drug trade. If you can limit that pillar, a lot of the other things that are going wrong, abuse, addiction, things that go wrong with addiction, theft, graffiti, garbage,
Mhm.
homelessness are largely impacted by a thriving drug trade. The second thing is protecting children. I don't know if the two of you have kids, I
She has
do.
kids, yeah.
It's never been easier to access children online. And there's been an
Yeah.
explosion of online sexual exploitation across the whole entire globe, but particularly in Oregon. I used to try those cases. We are not doing nearly enough to limit access to our children. Children are using drugs at an earlier age.
Mhm.
Child abuse statistics, child maltreatment statistics are all going up. And right now, I think there's a lack of public confidence in the institution of DHS, that DHS is doing a
Yes,
good
that's
job.
exactly right.
Yeah.
What people don't know is the Attorney General's office on the Child Protection Division, which is a massive division, is supposed to be holding DHS accountable.
I was wondering how that relationship works. Yeah.
And they're not.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
devastating.
they're not.
Those
And
poor children. And
DH
they're just being turned out onto the street to
yes.
end up as addicts and
It's
homeless
been like
people,
an
unsheltered
ongoing
homeless
decline
people.
with DHS, it seems like.
Yes.
That's what we should be passionate about. Children are the headwaters. If you had two tracks and a children was protected from trauma, protected from violence, and given education, enough food, all of these things, the track would be that they would likely statistically become very high functioning members of our community. If they experience significant trauma, especially sexual trauma, if they experience
Yeah.
abuse or addiction, it's a whole nother track. Well, we're going to provide services for them for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can get to that headwater and protect children and nurture them and create an environment where they thrive, it's generational success is what you're creating. And right now we are way down the river. Like we're how do we deal with this addict? Do we drop them off at the front door or we put them in jail? No, the real conversation is what are we doing right now to head off the trauma and the dysfunction for children? And it's not in the conversation. We're not doing anything. I'm embarrassed at the way Oregonians protect children. And I am an Oregonian, and I've spent my entire adult life, my entire career has been working on protecting children and trying to create an environment where they can thrive either here or in other countries. So that's going to be a major priority to me. And it's one way Ellen has not done well. And it's something that Dan has not done well either. And the third thing is corruption. I mean, Portland itself, like, do we trust that our government officials are misusing their office or using their offices appropriately or misusing their offices or misusing
There's no
funds?
transparency.
There's no transparency and there's no accountability.
I was gonna say we saw the whole Shemia Fagan scandal at the state level. It was,
Even that, you like this in the news this week. There's these Secretary of State audits where
Right.
money's missing everywhere. Where's
Right,
the
right,
investigation?
right. I know.
Who's held
Oh, I
accountable?
know.
Right.
I mean,
If the money was missing from a bank, they'd be there tomorrow. But if it's missing from DHS or
Right, it's a different story.
it's like
Multnomah County is just the
and so I feel like this is low hanging. I mean, it's crazy to have this be a platform that you're going to hold government officials accountable. You're going to protect children, and you're going to take on organized crime. That's not the Oregon I knew 10 years ago because we've lost sight of those fundamental things in government that create the protection and create a thriving business environment where we can start arguing about all the other political things we love to argue about. So I really want to get back to those basics, those nonpartisan basics, so that we can get off our knees in Oregon. You're asking about my Northwest story.
Yeah.
My family settled the eastern corner of back in the 1800s of Northeast Oregon. So Lathrop's like Smith in my county.
Okay.
It's the only place where everybody knows who a Lathrop is and how to
Right.
say the name. And yeah, my Oregon heritage is really important to me.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, let me quickly go through these. When you're parking somewhere, do you pull in or do you back in, like a normal parking spot?
I refuse to back in unless I'm just
refuse
gonna
to
just gonna annoy my wife because she also hates backing in. So
Okay,
I'm a
okay.
pulling first guy.
All right, I like it. Which piece of fruit do you think you could throw the farthest if you just chucked it across a football field?
Could it be ripe or green?
It's up to you.
I say a green plum.
Okay, I've never heard that. I like that one.
Yeah, they're firm.
That's the unripe. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, unripe. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, unripe.
Sounds
plum.
like somebody from an agricultural area. Like, yeah.
Do you like crunchy or smooth peanut butter, or maybe you don't like peanut butter?
Really love both.
Okay.
But I'd say more crunchy the better.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
me too. I like that
Yeah.
crunchy. And I also call that ambipenitribus. I don't think that's a real word. But, do you have a favorite type of French fry? Do you like regular cut, crinkle cut?
Straight out of undergrad, I started working for McMenamins, and
yeah, they got the tots.
But yeah,
Oh,
the tots
gosh,
are good.
the
Okay, the
tots.
Cajun tots. If tots are in play, then the
Yeah.
tots. But
Yeah.
I count them as a fry, but
we used to they call it wank the potato. So one of
like
my jobs
dip it
was to at least like you put it in a fry maker. You just wank the fries out of
Yeah.
the potato, and I always loved McMenamins fries.
they are good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Really good.
Let's see. Do you say you're getting ice cream? Do you go waffle cone, regular cone, cup?
I go to the front of the line and I ask if they have a brownie or a cookie.
Really? Oh, you're not
Oh.
an ice cream
Ice cream
guy.
is a garnish to me.
Okay,
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
I like
it's
that. I've
a
never-
la.
Yeah.
My
a
wife,
la mode, yeah.
my wife is a huge ice cream fan. She loves gourmet ice cream. She drags me there all the time, and I'm always asking, "Is that the one where they have cookies and brownies at the front?" She says, "Yes, Ella, we'll go there."
I like that. Let's see here. Do you eat string cheese?
Oh yeah,
Do you peel the string cheese or do you just eat it?
I'm a peel person.
Okay.
I have just eat it. It feels weird to me to just kind
That's
of eat it
okay.
like a
Mhm.
banana, but
I think I'm in the like 10% of people who just eat it. Um, I've got one more. If you were forced to run a gigantic brand, is there a brand you'd want to run?
Forced to.
Forced to? Yeah.
oh, that
I say that because like most
what a
people
great
running
question.
aren't really like into that. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, if this counts, I really like the sports business, so I would
Hmm.
love to own like the
Hmm.
Seahawks or the Blazers or
Oh
Mhm.
yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. If that was off the table, I would love to be leading an organization that most of the employees were sort of coming from low income backgrounds, because
Mm.
one of the things I loved about leadership, so my last job, I wasn't prosecuting anymore. I was leading these large offices and multiple offices of people. And I love the coach mentor nature of
Mm-hmm.
leading, and kind of seeing people start somewhere and working with them and trying to empower them and give them the facilities around them to grow into something bigger. So convenience stores or fast food chains,
Okay.
that kind of sounds attractive to me, because it would be a lot of entry level workforce that you could work with that in 20 years, where could this person be, or how could their lives
Totally.
change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, before we wrap it up here, where can people donate and all that stuff? Where do you want people to go to your website? And
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more or engaging with our campaign, you can just go to my website. It's willlathrop.com. I think we're on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And so
nice.
you can engage with us there as well.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks so much for coming
Thank you.
today.
Nice
Yeah,
Hey,
to meet you.
what a great time. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
absolutely.